Prior to this video, the man you're looking at had traveled nearly 18 hours after 2 days of not sleeping. It was his first time flying, and he was traveling to a country whose languages he did not speak. As you can imagine, he was extremely exhausted, and because of this, he was starting to grow frustrated. However, as bad as this all was, his problems up until this point would be nothing compared to what happens to him immediately after this. I'll tell you everything, but as usual, let's get into the backstories first. Happy Halloween, everyone. Robert Dziekańksi was a 40-year-old construction worker from Poland who had never flown before and spoke only Polish when he boarded a plane in October of 2007 to start a new life in Canada. He had spent years waiting for this moment, collecting atlases and geography books about Canada, eager to reunite with his mother, Zofia, who had immigrated to British Columbia 8 years earlier and worked as a janitor while saving money to help bring her son to join her. Not knowing English and never having even been on a plane, it was a new start for him, and he adored his mother, so reuniting with her permanently would be great for both of them. She wasn't married, and he was an only child. However, as the big move started to get closer, he began to grow very anxious. The night before his departure, Robert experienced a severe panic attack. It was so rough that he vomited, shook uncontrollably, and clung to a radiator for 20 minutes, nearly canceling the trip entirely before his mother convinced him over the phone to board the flight. By the time he left Poland for what would have been an 18-hour journey across 2 flights, he hadn't slept for 48 hours. But on October 13th, he eventually arrived at Vancouver International Airport, approximately 2 hours late at 3:15 in the afternoon. He was exhausted, but hopeful to finally see his mother and begin the life they had planned together, opening a small business. However, the issues Robert faced, unfortunately, did not end here. In fact, they were really only beginning. See, because he needed language support, he did not pass the primary immigration inspection, so he was sent to a secondary area. And we don't know what happened at this area, but we do know that he was seen by people and cameras wandering around, waiting for 6+ hours in this secure area. The reason he did this was because his mother had told him to meet her at the baggage claim area, not understanding that this was a secure zone where she could not enter. And for at least 5 hours, they were separated by glass walls, standing just 150 to 200 feet apart, both of them desperately searching for the other. Robert spent over 10 hours in the airport that day, possibly sleeping at times, before finally completing his immigration process around 12:45 in the morning on October 14th. His mother, after 9 hours of waiting and making repeated inquiries to airport staff, who by the way told her that he was not at the airport, had left home for Kamloops where she lived at around 10 that evening, meaning that she left the airport unaware that border services officers were processing her son at that very moment. When Robert finally cleared customs and entered the public reception lounge to find his mother gone, the exhaustion from such little sleep and the desperation of being unable to find the one person he knew in this country began to overwhelm him, and understandably so. I don't even know if I would have made it this far. Witnesses described him as sweating heavily, appearing distraught and confused, and eventually throwing a computer and small table in visible frustration. We can see this caught on camera, though importantly, no one who approached him felt threatened, and his agitation was never directed at people, only objects. And at approximately 1:28 in the morning on what was now October 14th, 4 RCMP officers, which is basically just Canada's FBI, arrived in response to multiple emergency calls reporting a man acting erratically. But things get bad very quickly. Without attempting any meaningful communication, without gathering information from witnesses, and without any warning as required by RCMP policy, Constable Kwesi Millington deployed his taser. Robert Dziekański fell to the ground screaming, and over the next 49 seconds, the taser was activated 5 times in total for 31 seconds of electrical current, including multiple applications while he was already on the ground and being physically restrained by all 4 officers. Because of his screams, this video is very disturbing, and by modern YouTube standards, I don't know if I can even show you it, but there are many uploads that you can find. After being handcuffed and while lying on the floor, Robert stopped moving and became unconscious. The officers failed to adequately check his breathing or pulse, delegated first aid responsibility to a private security supervisor instead of providing it themselves, and initially refused requests from responding firefighters and paramedics to remove the handcuffs. When emergency medical personnel arrived approximately 12 to 15 minutes after he lost consciousness, paramedics found that he was already gone. 40-year-old Robert Dziekański was pronounced deceased at the airport at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning on October 14, 2007, just 10 hours after arriving in the country that he had dreamed of moving to for years and a place his mother now called home. His cause of death was a heart attack. I think one of the saddest parts is that when he first sees the police approaching him, he shouts out police in almost like an excited tone, maybe thinking that they were coming or escorting his mom or something, but getting this terrible interaction instead. In the aftermath, systemic failures and deliberate deception that would take years to fully uncover were revealed. The Paul Pritchard video footage we saw a portion of, which the RCMP initially seized, contradicted virtually every initial police statement about the incident and sparked international outrage when released to the media in November of 2007. The Braidwood Inquiry, a comprehensive provincial investigation led by retired Justice Thomas Braidwood, concluded in June of 2010 that the officers were not justified in using the taser, and that they had approached the situation as though responding to a brawl rather than dealing with an obviously distraught traveler. It was also shown that their testimony contained deliberate misrepresentations made to justify their actions. The BC Coroner Service deemed it a homicide caused by the taser, but no officers were ever charged with Robert's death itself. All four, however, were charged with perjury for their testimony at the inquiry, and in 2015, Constable Millington was convicted and sentenced to 30 months in prison, while Corporal Benjamin Robinson was convicted and sentenced to 2 years. The two other constables, Gary Rundle and Bill Bentley, were cleared of these perjury charges. The Canadian government formally apologized to Zofia, his mother, and reached a confidential settlement with her in April of 2010, with the RCMP contributing $20,000 to establish a scholarship fund in Robert's name at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops for geography students, honoring the passion he had for the subject he never got to study. The tragedy led to fundamental reforms across Canada, including the creation of British Columbia's Independent Investigations Office, comprehensive restrictions on taser use, requiring them to be treated as potentially deadly weapons, and mandatory annual training for officers on de-escalation techniques. Zofia, Robert's mother, was absolutely devastated by this entire thing and truly never got over it. She never recovered from losing the son she had worked so hard to bring to Canada, and made annual visits to a memorial bench installed at Vancouver International Airport until her own death in 2019 at age 73. She spent 12 years seeking justice for Robert and ensuring that his death would not be forgotten. Zofia passed away of a stroke while visiting Poland, and in the words of those who worked very closely with her over this whole ordeal, she always had a darkness to her after the passing of her son, and that was something that just never ever left her. They were very close, and as a single mom having an only child, it was just utterly heartbreaking to her. She was very strong. She had a great sense of humor, actually. She saw a lot of humor in life, but at her core, I think that, when I say she was a grieving mother, you could see it physically and mentally. It bore heavily on her. There was a darkness about her, but she found strength from others as well and people supporting her. Rest in peace to Robert and Zofia, and I hope somehow, somewhere, they're finally building that business together. In the summer of 1988, a 12-year-old kid named Ricky was outside enjoying himself on a foggy day in Irondequoit, New York. This working-class suburb sat along the shores of Irondequoit Bay, just northeast of Rochester, where families had settled into nice ranch-style homes that were built during the post-war housing boom. Bay Knoll Drive, where Ricky's family lived, was a quiet residential street that backed up to wooden embankments overlooking the water. Before developers carved these neighborhoods from farmland in the late 1950s and 1960s, this had been orchard country, part of the broader wine-growing region that once characterized the landscape northeast of Rochester. Ricky and his family loved this home dearly. They felt comfortable, and that's what makes what we're about to get into so unexpected. On this particular morning, so July 31st, 1988, Ricky found himself in a pretty familiar predicament. His father was working in the garden and needed space to concentrate, so like many parents dealing with restless children during the summer, his dad suggested that Ricky find something productive to do outside. His dad, who did this on autopilot at this point, just thought to say, "Why don't you dig a hole in the backyard?" He was a bored kid with nothing else to do, so Ricky grabbed a shovel and headed to a spot near an embankment that bordered their property, where the soil was pretty soft. For the first foot or so, the digging went as expected. Again, the sandy soil, typical for the area, made the work relatively easy for a young one. And so the boy continued digging, probably thinking about how deep he could go or what he might find. The summer day was foggy but warm, and the physical work kept him busy and out of his father's way, exactly as intended. But then, about 2 feet down, Ricky's shovel struck something that didn't feel like a rock or root. As he cleared away more dirt, the shape became unmistakable. There were bones. At first, the discovery might have seemed like an exciting find to a curious 12-year-old. Could have been someone's old pet, or in his head, a dinosaur. I don't know why I scripted that in. But as he uncovered more, the reality became inescapably clear and very devastating. These were indeed human remains. Buried in this embankment was the complete skeletal remains of a young woman, headfirst in a shallow grave that had been hidden beneath his family's backyard for anywhere from 10 to 30 years. The Irondequoit Police Department immediately contacted forensic anthropologists from the Rochester Museum and Science Center to conduct a proper archaeological excavation. What they uncovered painted a disturbing picture. The victim was a female, estimated between 14 and 23 years old, standing at approximately 5'1". She had been placed in the ground, head down, with her back and legs positioned above in what Captain Mark Bean would describe as a head down first type thing. No clothing remained on the body, only 4 white buttons were recovered near the remains. The forensic examination revealed one crucial detail that investigators hoped would lead to identification. Extensive gold foil dental restorations on her 4 upper front teeth, along with slightly overlapping front teeth. This sophisticated dental work suggested that she had access to quality dental care, but the gold foil technique itself became a critical clue to timing. The forensic medical examiner determined the victim had likely died in the late 1950s to early 1960s, based partly on the style of dental work, which was more common in those earlier decades, but some estimates do put it closer to the 70s. The burial location presented its own challenges. A captain basically said that the sandy soil had degraded potential evidence over the decades because evidence simply just washes through and no trauma or prior injury was visible on the bones, making determining a cause of death impossible. However, because of burial factors, among other things, it was eventually ruled a suspected homicide. There's something just so sad about this, having so little information even to this day. The police captain said the thing that always upset me was whoever's family she was never listed as missing. In 1988, the Monroe County Medical Examiner's Office created a clay facial reconstruction, carefully building features to show what she might have looked like in real life, and man, this is just absolutely terrifying to me. People often make videos on eerie identikits, but I've never seen this specific clay reconstruction discussed before, and it's highly unnerving. I'm not saying this to try and make it spooky or whatever, I just actually get uncomfortable looking at this, knowing the context. The image was circulated widely at the time, dental records were documented and made available for comparison, and investigators conducted extensive searches through missing persons reports from the 1950s through 1970s. Nothing matched, no family came forward, no dental records aligned, and as forensic technology advanced through the 1990s and 2000s, DNA was successfully extracted from the skeletal remains and entered into national databases, but still, nothing. The profile has been continuously compared against all missing persons with DNA on file, but no matches have ever been found. In April of 2019, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created a new computer-generated facial reconstruction using advanced CT scans and photographs of the skull. A program manager named Carol at NCMEC expressed the motives behind continued efforts. Every child deserves a name. She deserves to be buried under her birth name and who she was and returned to her family rightly. We've seen a ton of does identified in recent years, and their passion for this is both incredibly admirable and actually effective. Today, nearly 4 decades after Ricky's summer day discovery, the case remains open with the Irondequoit Police Department and Monroe County Medical Examiner's Office. Over the years, 31 females have been officially ruled out as potential matches through various investigative methods. The captain, upon his retirement from the force, was asked about unsolved cases that haunted him. His response was immediate, and he said, "Always. It's the only one we've never solved." Somewhere and at some time, this young woman had a name, people who loved her, things she looked forward to, and now, this is all we have. I really would love to see this get solved one day. Rest in peace to her. I just want to let everyone know I'm going to be changing the title of my series from Distressing Things from the Internet to Distressing Things from the World because it just more accurately reflects my content now. Nothing else is going to change, the thumbnails will be the exact same thing. Just keep an eye out because I do worry that it may affect my views, but I highly doubt it. And if you are enjoying this video, please consider subscribing. A couple of videos ago I told you guys that I have a sort of arbitrary goal of hitting 100k by the end of the year, and it really helped in terms of sub count, so I figured I'd plug it again. If not, it's totally okay. I'll stop asking completely after 100k. The story begins in October of 2015 in Romania. At this time, many metalcore fans in Bucharest were anticipating an upcoming concert. Goodbye to Gravity, a band that had emerged from their city just 4 years earlier, was doing incredibly, and they were going to be playing a show later in the month. The music's actually really good. They began as a group of passionate friends in 2011 and had quickly grown into a nationally celebrated act. They got signed to Universal Music, Romania, and even performed across Europe. They also gave other Romanian musicians something to believe in, and though the band's run would end in 2015 for reasons I'm about to touch on, the 5 members of Goodbye to Gravity were and still are deeply loved both nationally and internationally. After the success of their debut album and a good run doing international festivals, the band had some time to start pouring their creative energy into crafting their sophomore one. This new work, titled Mantras of War, represented their artistic evolution and featured deeper, more complex themes. This album was going to be dropping on October 30th, 2015, and this release date had been chosen with care. The band wanted to share this moment with the very community that had supported them from the beginning, and in a good gesture of gratitude that would prove tragically fateful, they announced a free concert in their home of Bucharest to celebrate the album's launch. And although this album art was incredibly done, it would prove very eerie in hindsight. The venue chosen for this celebration was Club Colectiv, a nightclub nestled in Bucharest's Sector 4, and it laid within the walls of a former shoe factory. This factory had once been a massive industrial complex that employed hundreds during Romania's communist era, but after the fall of the regime in 1989, it fell into different hands, and by 2013, portions of the building had been converted into entertainment spaces. Colectiv opened its doors in May of that year, transforming a section of the old warehouse into a nightclub. Unfortunately though, this thriving location had a number of concerns that would later prove catastrophic. The club had been issued permits for a maximum capacity of just 80 seated patrons, but regularly hosted far larger crowds without proper oversight. The building's conversion from industrial space to entertainment venue had also involved the installation of polyurethane foam along pillars and ceiling areas to improve acoustics. But this material had not been treated with fire-resistant chemicals, and most troubling of all, the venue operated with only one primary exit, creating a dangerous bottleneck that violated safety principles for public gatherings. The evening of October 30th, 2015 would finally come. Excited patrons would head over for 8:30 p.m. when the doors were set to open, and by the time the concert began, approximately 400 people had packed into the 425 square meter space, nearly 5 times the official capacity. The crowd was a mix of devoted fans and curious friends simply seeking a Friday night of live entertainment. The majority of patrons were 18 to 30 years old, many students and others young professionals. Remember, this concert was free to get in. And so Goodbye to Gravity would gear up and prepare to perform songs from their new album for the first time, and at 10:30 p.m., the band took to the stage while the audience cheered and applauded. They slowly pressed closer to the stage, many with their phones held high, and for the first several songs, everything proceeded as planned. With the band delivering the level of performance their fans had come to expect. The energy in the room was incredible. But at some point, something terrible happened, and it happened very quickly. Sparks from some of the pyrotechnics used during the performance, the sparklers, reached one of the foam-covered pillars near the stage, and within seconds, the flammable material ignited and flames began racing across the ceiling very quickly. To me, this footage is one of, if not the highest quality examples of how fast this can all happen when fire safety regulations are not heeded. I'll show you the footage now. The faces are blurred for privacy reasons, and you don't see anything graphic.
La mulți ani! Să trăim! Asta nu era un plan. Are cineva extintor?
We see this become a gigantic inferno, and to make matters worse, the polyurethane foam released toxic gases while burning. The lead singer initially made a light joke about the flames not being part of the show, but his expression quickly changed to alarm as he called for fire extinguishers. Burning pieces of foam and wooden ceiling material began falling onto the crowd below, and the single main exit, which had only been partially open, became a lethal bottleneck as hundreds of people desperately tried to escape simultaneously. We also have CCTV footage of this. We could see it begin with people pouring out, but within just moments, this is what the camera is catching. People trampled one another in their rush to reach safety, while others succumbed to the heat, smoke inhalation, and toxic fumes from the burning foam. When emergency responders arrived, they found a scene that would probably haunt them forever. 27 people passed away that night within the club itself, while dozens more were rushed to hospitals with severe burns and problems from smoke inhalation, and trust me, this gets worse. Sadly, among the immediate casualties were two of the band's guitarists. They perished in the very venue where they were doing a free concert with the fans that they loved the most. The scope of initial injuries and passings overwhelmed Romania's medical system, which lacked adequate facilities for treating severe burns, forcing authorities to arrange emergency transfers to hospitals in Israel, Netherlands, Belgium, Austria, Germany, France, and even other countries. In the days and weeks that followed, the death toll continued to climb as many succumbed to their injuries. In fact, the drummer and the bassist also passed away in November. By the final count, 64 people had lost their lives, making this the deadliest nightclub fire in Romanian history. The only member of the band to survive was the vocalist, though he suffered burns to nearly half his body and endured months of painful recovery. And not only did he lose all 4 of his bandmates, he also lost his girlfriend in the fire. The investigation that followed this revealed a web of negligence and corruption that reached deep into Romania's institutions. The club had been operating without proper fire safety permits, used flammable materials that were known to be dangerous, and regularly exceeding capacity limits with apparent impunity from local authorities. Prosecutors discovered that safety inspections had been cursory or ignored entirely, with officials allegedly receiving bribes to overlook violations. The pyrotechnics company had no proper contract for the evening's show, with documentation hastily created after the fire to cover up the oversight. As details of the systematic failures emerged, grief transformed into rage across Romania. Beginning on November 1st, thousands of citizens took to the streets of Bucharest and other major cities, demanding accountability from their leaders. The protests grew night after night, with demonstrators chanting "corruption kills" and calling for resignations at every level of government. The pressure proved overwhelming for the country's leadership, and on November 4th, the prime minister at the time announced his resignation, followed by the resignation of the interior minister and the mayor of Sector 4, who had signed the permits allowing Colectiv to operate despite its safety deficiencies. The massive street protests that went on for 9 consecutive days had achieved something many thought was impossible in post-communist Romania, which is forcing accountability from the highest levels of power. However, based on many comments I've read under GTG's music videos, it seems that not much has ultimately changed. Romania still lacked proper burn treatment facilities years after the fire, meaning future victims would face the same medical inadequacies that had claimed so many Colectiv survivors. Also, investigative journalists later discovered that diluted disinfectants had contributed to deaths in hospitals, adding another layer to this. The final convictions didn't come until 2022, nearly 7 years later, when the club owners, mayor, and other officials received prison sentences totaling over 100 years. And on the topic of Goodbye to Gravity music videos and visuals, something eerie I noticed is that they have a song called The Day We Die, and in the visualizer, there are flames and a volcanic theme. This is extremely dark in hindsight. The 64 souls who were lost, including 4 talented musicians who had only wanted to share their art with the world, became symbols of a population who were demanding more from their leaders. But in the end, it still seems that not much has changed. The day that I'm posting this video, October 30th, 2025, marks exactly 10 years since this tragedy happened, and I'm glad to help spread more international awareness on this devastating incident. My heart is with all of the victims, their families, and the Romanian people on this difficult day. And thank you to Nico, a viewer and member of my Discord, because up until I started researching it, I hadn't actually heard of it. There's also an Oscar-nominated film on this that I highly recommend checking out.